Okay, so let's dive right in. We're looking at a pretty wild and honestly kind of a startling argument today. The idea is that one single catastrophic event didn't just change the course of history, it may have actually changed the entire focus of how three of the world's biggest religions think about God.
And right at the heart of this whole thing is a bombshell of a claim. Get this. If presented with the theology of later Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, Jesus and the apostles, as well as the biblical prophets, would not recognize these systems as a continuity of their intention. I mean, wow, that is a huge statement.
So that immediately makes you ask, how is that even possible, right? What in the world could happen that's so big it creates a total disconnect between the founders of a faith and what that faith becomes? Well, that's the big mystery we're going to try and unpack here.
Now, to get to the bottom of this, you first have to grasp a really core idea, that there are basically two completely different ways of thinking about reality. You can think of them like two different operating systems for your brain.
And this slide just lays it out perfectly. On one side, you've got the original Hebrew way of thinking. Let's call it the Action OS. The focus is all on what God does. Identity is about your actions, your role in the story. Then on the other side, you have the Greek way of thinking, the Essence OS, which came to dominate later. And here the whole focus shifts to what God is, his fundamental substance, his metaphysical nature. It's asking a totally different kind of question.
Let's dig into that original system for a second. It's called functional ontology. And really, it's a simple but super profound idea. You are what you do. Your identity is all about your purpose, your actions, and where you fit into the bigger story.
So in this ancient Hebrew mindset, identity is performance. God isn't defined by some list of abstract qualities. No, he is the one who brings Israel out of Egypt. A king isn't a king because of his DNA. He's a king because he actually reigns. What you do defines what you are.
Okay, now let's look at the system that eventually replaced it, substance ontology. And this is probably a lot more familiar to most of us. It's the idea that everything has some kind of permanent, invisible essence. Your actions don't define you, they just reveal the nature you already have deep down inside.
And running on this different OS completely changes the religious questions you ask. The focus becomes, what is God's essence? What is the divine nature? According to the source material, these kinds of questions would have sounded like total gibberish to the early biblical writers. They just weren't running that software.
So if that original Action OS was the default, what could possibly force a system-wide update on that scale? Well, that brings us to the main event, the world-changing rupture.
Seriously, just think about it for a second. What kind of event could be so devastating that it forces people to change the entire grammar of how they talk about God? What breaks a system where reality is defined by action?
And the answer is the Bar Kochba revolt from 132 to 135 CE, the final, brutal, and just absolutely devastating war between the Jews and the Romans, and it changed everything.
This timeline really puts it into perspective. I mean, you've got centuries of life centered on the temple. Even when the first temple was destroyed, they rebuilt it. But then the Romans destroyed the second temple. The Bar Kochba revolt was the last, desperate shot to get it back. When that failed, it wasn't just another loss. It was the permanent end of an entire world.
So the aftermath of this collapse was this huge three-stage crisis. First, the physical world, the temple, the priesthood, the land. It's all gone, for good. Second, that means the covenant, the whole Action OS, it can't be run anymore. How can you have a theology based on action when the places for those actions are destroyed? And that leads to the third step. Theology is forced to go abstract. When a theology can't be lived anymore, it has to be thought. It has to move from story to philosophy.
And this traumatic shift kicks off a totally new religious focus, what our source calls the Great Metaphysical Migration.
And this table just shows it so clearly how it happened across all three of these traditions. Just look at the change in focus. Christianity moves from talking about Jesus as a king or Messiah, those are action roles, to debating his metaphysical essence, his ousia. Judaism's focus shifts from God's actions in history to defining God as a philosophical necessary being. And Islam, which started with God's direct commands, develops these incredibly complex schools of thought to define God as an absolute being. They all migrated to the exact same new operating system.
This chart just visualizes that shift perfectly. Before 135 CE, the big theological words are lordship, mission, action. After 135 CE, the whole conversation changes. Now it's all about essence, substance, and nature. The focus is completely different.
And this is what leads to the Great Convergence. It's kind of wild. You have these three traditions arguing fiercely with each other, but without even realizing it, they're all starting to use the same underlying foundation, Greek metaphysical grammar. They were all arguing in the same new language.
So, you might be thinking, why does this matter? What does looking at history through this lens actually change? Well, pretty much everything.
Here's the most crucial takeaway. This shift in theological focus wasn't some gentle natural evolution. It was a forced translation of an entire way of seeing the world into a foreign, almost alien conceptual language. And it was all because of a historical catastrophe.
And this quote from the source really just puts it so bluntly. The deepest unity of the later traditions is not Abrahamic revelation, but Indo-European metaphysics. It's basically saying the thing they all have in common isn't what they think it is.
So it leaves us with this massive question, right? What if the real defining moment in Western theology wasn't some famous church council, but a forgotten, brutal military collapse?
And ultimately, the challenge this view throws at us isn't about choosing one religion over another or picking sides in some ancient doctrinal fight.
No, it's a much more fundamental choice. Do we try to recover that original action OS of Hebrew thought, a focus on what is actually done in the world, or do we just continue to operate in these borrowed metaphysical categories that were adopted out of pure necessity almost 2,000 years ago? Now that is a question worth thinking about.